He walked in slowly, each step deliberate, the kind that drew impatient eyes in a place built for speed and smiles. The restaurant was humming, waiters darting between tables, plates clinking, laughter rising and falling like background music. No one paid much attention to the man at first. He looked like someone who had wandered in from another world. His coat was old, not vintage but tired, the kind of fabric that had fought too many winters. His shoes scuffed, hands trembling slightly as he adjusted his hat. And when he spoke, his voice was low, uncertain, polite in a way that made it easy to dismiss. "Just a table for one, please." The host hesitated for half a beat, long enough to notice the coat, the rough hands, and the faint smell of rain on wool. Then came the glance toward the floor manager, a subtle signal that meant this one won't tip much. They seated him in the corner, near the kitchen doors where the clang of dishes swallowed conversation. The man didn't complain. He sat quietly, watching the world rush past him, invisible in plain sight. But the waiter noticed, and not kindly. Mark prided himself on spotting high spenders the moment they walked in. He was good-looking, sharp-tongued, and known for his efficiency, which in truth meant he decided who was worth his best service and who wasn't. The old man, in his eyes, clearly wasn't. So when he dropped the laminated menu on the table with a dull slap, he didn't bother with eye contact. "We close lunch in 30 minutes, so you might want to order fast," he said, already half turned away. The old man nodded. "Of course, I'll be quick." Mark didn't hear it, or pretended not to. He was too busy charming a group of corporate types across the room, the kind who laughed too loudly and signed receipts with a flourish. He didn't know that every move he made, every smirk, every whispered joke about the old man in the corner was being recorded, because this wasn't just another slow weekday at Mason's Grill. It was a test. A quiet one, a live one. The man in the corner was not who he seemed. Underneath the thrift store coat and shaky hands was Harold Mason, the founder and owner of the restaurant chain itself. A man worth millions. A man whose company had been struggling with complaints about declining culture and disrespectful staff. So he decided to see it for himself. No PR team, no cameras, no assistants. Just him, an old disguise, and a mission to find out what had gone wrong inside the empire he'd built. And what he saw that afternoon would change everything. The first sign came with the soup. The bowl clattered onto the table hard enough to spill a few drops over the edge. "Careful," Harold said softly, but the waiter was already gone. The soup was lukewarm, the spoon spotted. He waited a moment, then tried to catch Mark's attention for a refill of water. Mark saw him, but deliberately turned the other way. At another table, a young couple exchanged glances. The girl whispered something that made the guy frown. He looked toward Harold, then toward Mark, and finally raised his hand. "Hey man, can we get some water for him? He's been waiting." Mark rolled his eyes but walked over, plastering on a fake smile. Sure, he said, grabbing the pitcher from the counter. "Guess I'm the only one working today." The sarcasm dripped heavier than the water he poured, some of which splashed onto the table. "Thank you," Harold said again, still calm, still gentle. The waiter didn't reply. He just turned away, muttering something under his breath, something about charity cases and bad luck days. In the corner of the kitchen, another waiter, Alicia, overheard it. Her jaw tightened. She'd been working at Mason's for 6 years, knew most regulars by name, and treated everyone the same, whether they wore diamonds or denim. She glanced at the old man, saw the kindness in his eyes, and something in her chest twisted. But she kept quiet. Mark was senior to her, the manager's favorite, and calling him out had a cost. Meanwhile, Harold sat quietly, taking notes in his mind. Every tone, every look, every moment of humanity, or the lack of it. Then something unexpected happened. The restaurant door opened again, letting in a gust of cold air and a man in a suit that screamed money. Tall, confident, the kind whose presence rearranged the room. Mark spotted him instantly, his posture transforming like a chameleon's color shift. The fake smile became genuine, or close enough. "Good afternoon, sir. Welcome to Mason's Grill. Table for one." "Actually," the man replied, "I'm meeting someone." He looked around, scanning the room, and his gaze landed on the corner table. The old man stood slowly, offering a small nod. Mark froze. The suited man walked straight over, his tone warm, familiar. "Harold, there you are. Thought I'd missed you." Every fork in the room seemed to stop mid-air. Mark blinked. The other staff exchanged confused glances. Harold smiled faintly. "I wanted to see the place for myself," he said, his voice calm but carrying authority now. Mark's throat went dry. He could feel the blood draining from his face as realization began to claw its way in. But Harold wasn't done. He looked at his guest, a corporate consultant named Daniel, then at the staff. "I came to see how things feel on a regular day," he said, "without anyone knowing who I was." His gaze moved toward Mark and lingered. "And it's been enlightening." The silence that followed was sharp, heavy. Even the kitchen noise seemed to dim. Mark opened his mouth, then closed it. "Sir, I didn't realize—" "That's the point," Harold interrupted. "You didn't realize who I was, and that shouldn't matter." Alicia looked down at her shoes, heart racing. The other waiters avoided eye contact altogether. Harold wasn't angry, not visibly, but the disappointment in his tone was more powerful than shouting could ever be. Daniel cleared his throat softly. "Maybe we should talk in your office, Harold." "In a moment," Harold said. "First I want to finish my soup. Maybe this time it'll be warm." Mark swallowed hard, his hands trembling slightly as he picked up the bowl. The kitchen staff pretended to be busy, but every ear was tuned to the unfolding scene. When Harold left later that afternoon, the restaurant felt hollow. Mark stood by the counter, face pale, while Alicia placed her hand gently on his arm. "You okay?" He nodded numbly, though his mind was spinning. He didn't know what would happen next, but he could already sense that whatever it was, it wouldn't be simple. Because Harold Mason hadn't just been humiliated, he'd been awakened, and by the time his car pulled away from the parking lot, he'd already decided exactly how to deal with what he'd seen. The next morning, the staff at Mason's Grill walked into a storm they didn't see coming. Not the kind with thunder and lightning, but the silent, invisible kind that crackles through the air before something explodes. The whispers started early. Someone claimed they saw a black SUV pull into the parking lot before opening hours. Another swore they'd overheard the regional manager on the phone saying, "He's serious this time." No one said his name out loud, but everyone knew who he was. Harold Mason, the man who had built the chain from a single diner 30 years ago with nothing but a coffee machine and a dream. The man who had turned that small-town eatery into a nationwide name, synonymous with comfort, family, and respect. He had always believed that people didn't come to Mason's just for food. They came for connection, for warmth, for the feeling that someone cared. But what he'd seen the day before had shattered that belief into dust. In his downtown office that morning, Harold sat by the window staring at the city below. His disguise was gone, his old coat folded neatly beside his chair. Across the table sat Daniel, the consultant who'd met him at the restaurant. Daniel was good at reading rooms, but right now, even he couldn't tell what Harold was thinking. "Harold," he said carefully, "I know yesterday was rough, but maybe it was just one bad staff member. You built a culture people love. Don't lose faith in that because of one incident." Harold didn't look away from the window. "One bad staff member is a symptom," he said quietly, "not the disease." He turned finally, eyes sharp, voice steady. "We're doing an internal review, full scope, no announcements. I want to see how deep this goes, every restaurant, every manager, every shift. Daniel frowned. You mean an undercover audit? Exactly. I'll send different people to dine anonymously, talk to employees, observe behaviors. If respect and compassion have died inside my company, I want to know who killed them. Within hours, a discreet email left corporate headquarters under the subject line, Customer Experience Quality Review, Confidential. Regional managers received it, thinking it was just another routine audit. None of them knew who had triggered it. Back at Mason's Grill, the staff were jittery. Mark showed up late, dark circles under his eyes, still replaying the scene from yesterday. Alicia was already there, restocking napkins, trying to stay focused. When Mark approached, she didn't smile. "Rough night?" she asked. He nodded. "Didn't sleep. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw his face." Alicia hesitated, then said softly, "Maybe you should apologize." Mark scoffed, though without conviction. "To the owner of the company? He probably never wants to see me again." "Maybe," she said, "but people like him remember everything, especially the truth." He didn't answer. Instead, he grabbed a tray and started setting up for lunch service. But something in his chest felt heavy, twisted. He'd always thought of himself as quick, clever, in control. Now he felt small, exposed. Around noon, a woman walked in, mid-30s, confident, holding a leather notebook. She smiled warmly at the hostess and asked for a table. No one recognized her. They didn't know she was part of Harold's secret review team. Her name was Claire, a corporate operations analyst handpicked by Harold himself. Her mission was simple: blend in, observe, and report. As she ordered her meal, she noticed everything: the rushed tone in the waiter's voice, the lack of greeting at the door, the way the manager barked orders instead of giving direction. It wasn't chaos, but it wasn't care either. And then she noticed Mark. He was serving a table of 3 college kids who looked like they were celebrating something small but meaningful: a new job, a birthday, maybe both. They were polite, cheerful, easy to serve. But Mark's smile never reached his eyes. He was distracted, nervous, scanning the door like he was waiting for someone to walk in and end his career. Claire jotted a note discreetly. Low morale, uneven service tone, disconnected culture. Later that afternoon, Harold called her. "Tell me what you see." "Surface-level smiles," she said. "No heart. Some are trying, most are tired. The respect is gone, Harold. It feels transactional." He was silent for a moment, then said, "That's not who we are." That night, Harold visited the flagship location, the first Mason's diner ever built. It was smaller, older, but somehow more alive. The staff there greeted everyone by name. The manager, a man in his 50s named Raoul, still polished tables himself between rushes. When Harold asked him what kept the place running so smoothly, Raoul smiled. "Simple," he said. "We hire for kindness, skills we can teach, but heart. You either have it or you don't." Harold leaned back, the words echoing. He realized then what had gone wrong. As the company grew, its core values had been watered down by layers of management, quotas, and performance metrics. Kindness had become optional. Humanity had turned into a soft skill. The next morning, Harold made a decision that would shake the company to its core. He called a private meeting with the executive team. "Starting next week," he announced, "I'll be visiting every region personally. No press, no warnings. If any location fails to show the respect that built this brand, management will be replaced. Permanently." The room went silent. One executive, a man named Robert, shifted uncomfortably. "Harold, that's aggressive. We might lose people, experienced people." "Then they were never the right people," Harold replied firmly. "I'd rather rebuild from scratch than watch my company rot from within." At Mason's Grill, word began to spread that something big was happening. Staff whispered about corporate visitors, secret diners, sudden inspections. Some panicked. Others, like Alicia, felt a strange sense of hope. Maybe this was the change they'd been waiting for. Mark, though, felt trapped. He had sent an email apology to corporate, unsure if Harold would ever read it. Every time his phone buzzed, his heart jumped. Days passed. No response. Then, one afternoon, as the restaurant slowed after lunch rush, the manager called out, "Mark, you've got a visitor." He looked up and froze. Standing near the door was Harold Mason. No disguise this time. Clean suit, calm presence, the same quiet eyes. The restaurant went silent. Even the kitchen stopped clattering. Harold walked up to Mark slowly, every eye following him. "I got your email," he said. Harold raised a hand, stopping him mid-sentence. "Apologies are a start," he said. "But tell me, why?" Mark hesitated. "Honestly, I thought you were just some old man who wouldn't tip. I judged you. I've been doing that for a while, I guess. It's how this place works now. You serve fast, you smile fake, you move on." Harold's face didn't move, but his eyes softened slightly. "And does that make you proud?" "No," Mark said quietly. "It makes me tired." Harold nodded once, slowly. "I can work with that answer." He turned to the manager. "Mark will report directly to me for the next month. Consider it an opportunity." The manager blinked, confused. "Opportunity, sir?" "Yes," Harold said. "To remember why we built this company in the first place." Then, without another word, he left, leaving behind a restaurant full of stunned silence and one waiter who suddenly realized that redemption might come, but never without a test. That night, Mark stayed after closing, cleaning every table himself. Alicia found him there, wiping down the counter. "What are you doing?" she asked. He shrugged. "Starting over." And for the first time in a long time, his smile was real. But he didn't know that the real test, the one that would decide his fate and the company's future, was only just beginning. The week that followed felt like the calm before a corporate earthquake. Emails buzzed, rumors flew, and every manager in the Masons chain seemed to suddenly rediscover their professionalism. Aprons were ironed, smiles rehearsed, and kitchens scrubbed until they gleamed. Yet beneath the polished surfaces, tension pulsed like static. Everyone knew that Harold Mason, the founder, the ghost in the system, was somewhere out there, watching. Mark didn't know what to expect when he was told to report to headquarters. The last time he'd seen Harold, the man had given him an opportunity that sounded suspiciously like a test, disguised as mercy. Now he sat in a sleek, glass-walled conference room that felt a world away from the clatter of the restaurant floor. Every surface gleamed, every logo screamed success, but Mark felt small in his cheap shoes and borrowed tie. Then the door opened and Harold stepped in. No entourage, no assistants, just him, and the quiet authority that followed him like a shadow. "Good morning, Mark," he said. "Morning, sir." Harold gestured to the seat opposite him. "You're not here to be fired. You're here to help me understand." Mark blinked. "Help you?" Harold nodded. "I've heard what managers tell me. I've read reports and customer surveys. But what I saw in your restaurant, that was truth. I want to know what's happening behind the smiles, the real culture. You've been there day after day. Tell me why people stopped caring." Mark hesitated. The instinct to protect himself clashed with something deeper, a chance to make things right. He took a breath. "It's not one thing, sir. It's everything. We're understaffed, underpaid, and over-monitored. Management pushes numbers, sales targets, upsell percentages, table turnover rates. They tell us to care, but if you spend too long talking to a customer, you get warned. If you give away a free refill without logging it, you get written up. Eventually, you stop trying. You start thinking about the next table, the next shift, the next paycheck." Harold listened without interrupting. Mark continued, his voice low but firm. And the thing is, we all started because we liked people. We liked the energy, the stories, the little moments that make the job worth it. But somewhere along the way, the company stopped seeing us as people. We became numbers too. The words hung in the air. Harold leaned back, eyes narrowed in thought. "That's exactly what I needed to hear," he said finally, "because you're not the only one who feels that way." He reached into his briefcase and slid a folder across the table. Inside were transcripts, reports, and hidden evaluations from more than a dozen locations across the country. The pattern was the same. Good food, fast service, no soul. "I built this place on connection," Harold said quietly. "Now it's all algorithms and bonuses. Somewhere between the spreadsheets, we lost our humanity." He stood, pacing slowly. "So, we're going to bring it back." Mark frowned. "How?" Harold turned, a small, knowing smile forming. "By going back undercover. But this time, not just me. You're coming with me." Mark froze. "Me? Undercover? You'll pose as a shift supervisor at a few other locations. You'll see how managers treat new hires, how they talk to staff when they think no one's watching. You'll be my eyes and ears. You'll tell me who deserves to stay and who doesn't." It was surreal. A week ago, Mark had been mocking the man in the coat. Now that same man was asking him to help rebuild an empire. "Sir," Mark said quietly, "I don't know if I deserve this." Harold smiled faintly. "Maybe not. But I'm not looking for people who've never made mistakes. I'm looking for people who've learned from them." And so it began. Over the next month, Harold and Mark traveled quietly across the country. They showed up at random Masons locations, blending in among the staff. Sometimes Harold played a maintenance worker, sometimes a customer again. Mark, meanwhile, would spend days pretending to be a trainee or assistant manager. What they discovered was both illuminating and heartbreaking. In one restaurant in Phoenix, a manager screamed at a teenage waiter for spilling a drink, loud enough for every customer to hear. The boy apologized again and again, his hands shaking. The manager didn't stop until Harold, posing as a janitor, stepped in and said softly, "He's already said sorry. Maybe what he needs now is a teacher, not a tyrant." The room fell silent. Later, when corporate reviewed the hidden footage, that manager's name quietly disappeared from the payroll. In another location in Denver, a single mother on the night shift quietly paid for a homeless man's meal out of her own pocket. No one noticed, except Mark. He made sure Harold knew. That employee would later find herself promoted to team lead, her act of kindness quietly rewarded. Each visit revealed the same truth in different shades. The places where kindness thrived were the ones where leaders led with empathy, not ego. And the places where disrespect festered always had one thing in common: a manager who cared more about power than people. But not everyone welcomed the sudden changes. As whispers of Harold's covert visits spread, panic turned to paranoia. Some regional managers began staging fake good service scenes whenever corporate was nearby. Others tried to manipulate the new system by faking reports of generosity and teamwork. It didn't work. Harold had learned to spot false sincerity. And Mark, once the embodiment of that very problem, now had a radar for it. One afternoon they sat in a car outside another restaurant, this one in New Jersey. Rain streaked the windshield. Inside, through the glass, they could see the staff moving like clockwork. Too perfect, too rehearsed. "They know we're coming," Mark said quietly. Harold nodded. "Let's see how good they are when they don't." He picked up his phone and called Daniel. "Tell them the inspection's delayed," he said. "Then we'll walk in ourselves, unannounced." What they found inside was an illusion shattered. Smiles vanished the moment the staff thought no one important was watching. A hostess ignored customers. A waiter argued with the chef. And in the corner office, the general manager bragged about keeping morale in line through fear. Harold stepped inside that office, removed his hat, and said calmly, "How's that working out for you?" The man froze. Recognition flickered in his eyes. "Mr. Mason, sir, I didn't know you were—" "That's exactly the problem," Harold said. "You think respect depends on who's watching." That manager was gone by the end of the day. By the time the undercover reform reached its third week, the company had transformed. Not entirely, not perfectly, but something real was happening. Managers started holding daily gratitude meetings. Customers noticed the difference. Reviews online began to shift from complaints to stories about kindness, about second chances, about the feeling that Masons had heart again. But success never comes without resistance. Deep inside the corporate structure, a few executives saw Harold's reforms as a threat. To them, the company's future wasn't about kindness. It was about control, profit, expansion. They whispered in meetings, plotted in private calls, and began looking for ways to undermine him quietly. One night, Mark overheard part of a conversation while passing by Harold's office. The door was slightly ajar. He heard the words board vote, loss of authority, and mandatory retirement. He froze. The very people Harold was trying to save his company from were now turning against him. He stepped back, heart pounding, unsure whether to tell Harold. The man had trusted him, mentored him, changed him. But if the corporate board was planning something, it could end everything they were building. That night, as rain began to fall again, Mark made a decision that would define his loyalty once and for all. He picked up his phone, dialed Harold's number, and said quietly, "Sir, I think someone's coming for you from the inside." There was silence on the line, then Harold's calm voice. "Then it seems the real test isn't over yet." The air in Harold's office felt heavier than usual the next morning. The city skyline glowed beyond the tall glass windows, but the light did nothing to ease the tension crawling beneath the surface. On the table lay a thick folder marked "Confidential." Board Review Proposal. Harold hadn't opened it yet, but he didn't need to. He already knew what it was. The quiet rebellion he'd sensed brewing inside the company had finally taken form. Mark sat across from him, looking uneasy. He'd barely slept since the call. "Sir, I heard them mention a vote. They said something about leadership restructuring and protecting shareholder confidence. It sounded serious." Harold's eyes didn't leave the folder. "It's serious," he said calmly. "It's a coup dressed up as concern." "Can they do that?" Mark asked. Harold finally looked up, a hint of a smile tugging at the corner of his mouth. "In theory, yes. In spirit, no. But the problem with business is, it's not always ruled by spirit." He leaned back in his chair, fingers steepled. "They think I've lost control, that my focus on empathy is bad for profits. They want Masons to go public next year, and compassion doesn't fit neatly on a balance sheet." Mark frowned. "But the numbers are up. Customer reviews are better than ever. Doesn't that prove you're right?" Harold nodded. "To us, yes. To them, it's too human. They can't measure kindness, so they call it weakness." He stood, walking toward the window, watching traffic move below like veins pulsing through the city. "They're wrong," he said quietly. "But proving it will take more than words." Meanwhile, in a sleek office across town, 3 senior executives were already laying the groundwork for their plan. Robert, the CFO, Helen, the Chief Operations Officer, and Victor, the head of strategy. They'd once admired Harold, but admiration had long since curdled into ambition. "This is the perfect moment," Robert said, flipping through charts and projections. "He's distracted with his so-called reform program. Investors are nervous. We push this narrative, Masons losing profitability under idealistic leadership, and the board will have no choice but to vote him out." Helen sipped her coffee, eyes sharp. And once he's gone, we modernize the brand. Automation, data-driven staffing, AI analytics for customer behavior. We'll double the margins in 6 months. Victor smirked. And triple our bonuses. They didn't realize that Claire, the undercover analyst who had once evaluated Mason's grill, had joined Harold's inner circle. And she was listening. That evening, Claire walked into Harold's office with a flash drive. "You'll want to see this," she said, sliding it across his desk. "Recordings, meeting notes. They're planning to push a narrative that you're unfit to lead. Votes scheduled for next Thursday." Harold's expression didn't change. "You took a risk bringing me this." "Maybe," she said, "but if they win, the culture you rebuilt dies with it." For the first time, Harold smiled faintly. "Then let's make sure they never get the chance." The next few days moved like pieces on a chessboard. Harold called Daniel and Mark into a private meeting at his home. The house wasn't what anyone expected. Simple, quiet, filled with old photos of the first Mason's diner and the handwritten motto that still hung on the wall. "Serve people, not plates." "Gentlemen," Harold began, "we're not fighting numbers. We're fighting perception. They've convinced the board that compassion is inefficiency. We're going to show them that it's power." "How?" Daniel asked. "By giving them a story they can't ignore," Harold replied. "Real stories, real people. I want every success from this reform program documented. Customers, employees, communities, everything we've changed in the last month. We'll make them see what Masons really stands for." Mark nodded. "You want proof of impact?" "Exactly," Harold said. "And you'll help me deliver it." Over the next several days, Mark and Claire visited locations where the undercover reforms had sparked transformation. They met the single mother in Denver who had been promoted after her act of kindness. She told them how her son now dreamed of working at Mason someday because it's a place that believes in good people. They met Raul, the old manager from the first diner, who had started mentoring new hires across states. They met customers who said they'd come back, not because the food changed, but because the people did. Each story became a thread in Harold's plan, a living argument for why Masons couldn't survive without its heart. The night before the board meeting, Harold sat alone in his office reviewing the final presentation. He looked tired but resolute. The weight of decades, every diner, every customer, every employee, seemed to rest on his shoulders. Mark walked in quietly. "You ready?" Harold smiled. "Always." Mark hesitated. "What if they still vote against you?" "Then they can have my company," Harold said softly. "But they'll never own what it stands for." The next morning, the boardroom was a battlefield of polite hostility. 12 members sat around a long, polished table. Cameras recorded everything for corporate transparency. At the head sat Harold, calm and steady. Across from him, Robert, Helen, and Victor whispered to one another, confidence gleaming in their eyes. Robert cleared his throat. "Mr. Mason, thank you for joining us. The board has convened to review leadership performance and strategic direction. Many feel your recent initiatives, while noble, have not aligned with our profitability goals." Harold said nothing. Victor added, "There's concern that emotional management is slowing efficiency. We're proposing a leadership restructuring to restore investor confidence." Finally, Harold spoke. "You've made your case. Now let me show you mine." The lights dimmed. The screen behind him flickered to life. One by one, videos played, employees telling their stories. The teenage waiter from Phoenix, now smiling as he trained new hires. The single mother in Denver speaking proudly about her promotion. Customers sharing how Masons had become a place where they felt seen. Then came something unexpected. The footage shifted to Mark, the very waiter who had once mocked Harold. He spoke directly to the camera. "I disrespected a man I thought was beneath me," he said. "That man turned out to be the founder of this company. He could have fired me, but instead, he gave me a chance to change. That's what leadership means. Not fear, not numbers, but second chances. And if we lose that, we lose Mason's. The room was silent when the lights came back on. Harold stood. You say compassion doesn't belong in business, but compassion is the business. Without it, Mason's becomes just another restaurant chain chasing trends until it disappears. He paused, letting the silence stretch. If you think profit and principle can't coexist, then I've failed to teach you what this company means. But if you still believe that respect and success can live together, then stand with me. For a moment, no one moved. Then Raoul, the old manager from the flagship diner, now representing the employee council, stood up. I've been here since day one, he said, and I stand with Harold. Slowly, others followed. One by one, board members raised their hands, not all, but enough. When the votes were tallied, Harold remained CEO by a single vote. Robert's face turned pale. Helen looked away. Victor slammed his pen down. Harold looked at them calmly. Gentlemen, this company isn't just mine, it's everyone's who believes in it. You wanted efficiency? Then learn this. Nothing is more efficient than a team that cares. The meeting adjourned, but the ripples were only beginning. As Harold left the room, reporters were already outside, tipped off about the internal drama. He ignored their questions, walking past flashing cameras with quiet dignity. Mark caught up to him in the hallway. You did it. Harold smiled faintly. We did it, but it's not over. Tomorrow we start proving that vote right. That night, for the first time in weeks, Mason's corporate headquarters glowed with a different kind of energy. Not fear, not ambition, but hope. Yet in a dark corner office on the top floor, Robert watched the news feed with narrowed eyes. His hand clenched into a fist as the headlines scrolled across the screen. Harold Mason survives coup. Employees celebrate leadership built on compassion. He leaned forward, whispering to himself, Enjoy your victory, Harold. It won't last. And somewhere in the distance, the storm Harold thought he'd weathered began to gather again. Quiet, patient, waiting for its moment. The restaurant's lights dimmed slightly as the evening rush began to fade, but the atmosphere didn't cool down. It grew tenser. Word had spread among a few senior employees that something was off about the old man. They couldn't put their finger on it, but his sharp, piercing eyes didn't match the frailty of his movements. He was quiet, observant, and took mental notes of everything, from the way the hostess smiled to the tone in the bartender's voice when he joked about tips. The manager, Patricia, didn't like uncertainty. She prided herself on control, precision, and performance. To her, everything had to appear perfect in front of customers, but tonight, she felt something unusual stirring beneath the polished surface of her restaurant. She had noticed the old man sitting for hours, ordering the cheapest items, never complaining, yet never truly blending in either. There was a stillness about him that unsettled her, as if he was watching a movie everyone else was acting in, one he already knew the ending to. The waiter Dylan, however, was oblivious. He doubled down on his mockery, cracking jokes about the penny pincher at table 9 to his co-workers. He had no idea that every careless comment was being recorded, every cruel chuckle echoing into an invisible report that would determine his fate. Meanwhile, the old man, whose real name was Charles Bennett, CEO and founder of the entire restaurant chain, sat with a calm he hadn't felt in years. This wasn't just a test for the staff. It was a test of his company's soul. He had built his first restaurant on the belief that kindness was the most profitable form of service. But somewhere along the way, expansion had taken over. Numbers mattered more than people. Profits more than smiles. And tonight, he wanted to know, had that spirit survived or had greed swallowed it whole? When Patricia finally approached his table, her voice was polite but detached. Sir, I hope everything's all right tonight. Is your soup warm enough? He looked up, his tired eyes holding her gaze longer than expected. "Everything's fine, thank you," he said softly, his tone layered with meaning she couldn't quite place. "You run a tight ship here." The compliment should have pleased her, but instead her stomach tightened. There was something in the way he said it, measured, almost testing. She forced a smile and excused herself, pretending not to notice her pulse quicken. Behind the counter, Dylan was laughing with the bartender, recounting how the old man had asked for a water refill 3 times. "Probably can't afford a drink," he scoffed, shaking his head. "If I had a dime for every cheap customer like that." The bartender chuckled uneasily, glancing around as if expecting someone to intervene. But no one did. Not yet. Upstairs, a small room filled with screens and surveillance feeds hummed quietly. A woman in a headset took notes as Charles's voice came through a concealed microphone. "He's mocking customers openly," Charles reported evenly. "I want HR to note that. But observe how the rest react, who steps in and who stays silent." The woman nodded, already marking down the timestamps. Back downstairs, a new customer entered, a woman in her 60s with a cane. The hostess smiled, but Dylan rolled his eyes. 2 senior citizens tonight. Guess it's discount hour." The remark wasn't whispered. The old man heard it. So did a young busboy named Javier, who had been clearing a nearby table. Javier froze, glancing nervously toward the waiter, then toward the older customer. Something in him snapped. Quietly but firmly, he stepped closer. "Hey man, that's not cool," Javier said under his breath. "You don't talk about people like that." Dylan smirked. "Relax, hero. She didn't hear me." But Javier didn't back down. "Doesn't matter if she did. You work here. Show some respect." The restaurant seemed to hold its breath. For a moment, Dylan looked like he might explode. But then, realizing customers were watching, he faked a laugh and muttered something about kids with no sense of humor. Still, the damage was done. Charles watched the entire scene unfold, his expression unreadable. In that brief exchange, he had found a glimmer of what he'd been searching for, the kind of integrity that couldn't be trained or bought. Later that night, after the crowd had thinned and the staff began cleaning up, Charles called for his bill. Dylan approached lazily, dropping the check on the table without a word. Charles glanced at it, then reached into his worn coat pocket, pulling out a small, crumpled envelope. Inside was exact change, down to the cent. No tip. Dylan stared at the money, his smirk fading. "No tip," he muttered under his breath, but loud enough for the old man to hear. Charles rose slowly from his chair, adjusting his coat. "Son," he said calmly, his voice carrying more authority now, "sometimes the real tip is what life gives you when you least expect it." Dylan frowned, confused. "What's that supposed to mean?" But Charles didn't answer. He simply nodded once, turned, and walked toward the exit. The door chimed softly as it closed behind him, leaving an eerie silence in his wake. As Dylan cleared the table, he found something under the soup bowl, a folded napkin with handwriting on it. He unfolded it, expecting a note of complaint or a scribbled insult. Instead it read, "Character isn't built when people are watching. It's revealed when they're not." The words hit him harder than he wanted to admit. He crumpled the napkin, stuffed it into his apron, and tried to shake it off. But deep down, something uncomfortable had started to stir, a realization he wasn't ready to face. The next morning, when the staff gathered for their routine pre-shift meeting, Patricia's voice was unusually firm. "Everyone," she began, "we'll have a company representative visiting today for a surprise evaluation, so please act professional." Dylan rolled his eyes, whispering to another waiter, "Great," as if last night wasn't bad enough. He had no idea that the representative was already on the way, and it wasn't someone new. When the doors opened, every conversation stopped. The same old man from last night walked in, but this time there was nothing humble about his presence. His coat was gone, replaced by a tailored suit. His posture was straight, his eyes sharper than ever. Patricia froze, her breath catching in her throat. Dylan's face went pale. "Good morning, everyone," Charles said, his voice clear and commanding. "I believe we met last night." The silence was electric. Every employee stood still, the truth dawning slowly, heavily, painfully. Dylan swallowed hard, feeling the weight of every word he'd said. And for the first time, he understood. He hadn't been serving a poor old man. He'd been serving the man who owned everything around him.